What's up guys, it's that Panda Guy and I'm here again with another video, and today we're going to be talking about the Genesis War events, a lot of the criticisms that I personally had, and actually things that I thought were good that I feel like some people were just disagreeing on, or maybe people just weren't commenting on like as many of the good points of Genesis War, and I did want to point them out as well, but we'll kind of hop into this right now. So for my first main criticism, and I actually had to put up a script because there was so much. But point one will be the match pacing, right? Because I honestly think that the match pacing was maybe one of the worst things for me personally. So I don't generally like pacing very much. I actually didn't have a big issue when it came down to, like, let's say tower shields, because I thought that that in itself was actually a cool aspect to add and maybe add some sort of pacing to battles. But I think the issue is when you start trying to add something like pacing in a fight, or, you know, putting downtime between fights, like shields on towers and stuff, is that you're going to mess with a lot of people's time zones. You're going to make it, you know, just much harder to fight. And I mean, even then, it's like when they're doing these 1 hour fights and you only have 2 hours worth of fighting between these within the event, not only are the actual structures themselves as strong as they are, you know, so capturing these zombie hubs and stuff take forever for most groups, majority of them. It's also the fact that you're just spending half the time getting set up when you're setting 5-minute rallies, etc., etc. Like, why are we setting 5-minute rallies and whatnot when this is we have an hour to fight? Like, why aren't these not like 1-minute rallies? Why is the pacing not faster? Why aren't the march speed maybe faster? I wish that the towers up mid even opened up maybe an hour earlier than the actual hubs and stuff, right? Because this would get you able to position yourself, maybe have some extra fights over towers or something within that time period, because a lot of groups aren't able to get the full extent of the actual fighting that they would like within these like 2 hours, 2 hour time period. It's just a little bit stupid to me. Personally, I do understand why they do it, especially since you're fighting over the period of 5 days. And like I said, people have actual lives, and I like the fact that they did add some sort of pacing. That in itself is actually kind of cool to me. That being said, I feel like there's too little fighting for at least me personally. I would love if they could maybe put the downtime between fights being 4, maybe 6 hours instead of it being 8 hours or something. And maybe you could get another fight in, or maybe the fights themselves would be slightly longer, or, you know, even just changing the rally time or changing the speed on the field. I don't know. It takes too long to do everything. You're spending so much time capturing other towers, capturing the actual structures, and I feel like the only exceptions to this is maybe the top brackets in Apex. Like even I personally, and I wasn't struggling to the point where I couldn't beat these things, but I was taking minutes, you know, maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever, probably 5 minutes, to capture like a science hub, which has like 7 million troops in it, you know what I mean? Not to mention capturing the towers to actually, you know, get in a position to fight the enemies and push them back, or, you know, just whatever, right? And it just takes too long to do everything. I don't really like that. I feel like they really should kind of work on the pacing, you know, and yeah. So point two that I actually have as criticism will be that the rewards are bad. And I will say personally, I'm not someone who cares majorly about rewards. Like, actually, I do not care too much. But even then, I have to say, like, it is a pretty discouraging factor seeing that I'm getting such doo-doo rewards going in, right? Like, I spent billions of resources fighting last Genesis War, right? And I got a few fragments, you know? I got a few fragments for my effort. Not to mention, you're competing among a freaking war zone, which has 100 plus, 128 alliances, and you can estimate there's maybe 70 or to 100 members in each alliance, you know, average. And that is just insane that you're competing among that big bracket for just these doo-doo rewards, you know? Like in Apex, I believe first place got like 20 of gun fragments, maybe 20, whatever the other fragment was. And then in Fearless Warzone, you got 8 fragments and 8 fragments of first place. You know, that just kind of puts it in perspective. Whereas in like Apex, people were scoring 3 billion points or something in at least Warzone 1 just for like 20, or I guess 40 fragments if you add them together, which, you know, they're not bad in itself, but it's like, you know, 3 billion points to earn that, and only one player gets that within the 128 alliances. That is just crazy to me. It doesn't make a lot of sense. The rewards, like I said, themselves are just really bad. I feel like it's not very encouraging to make people fight. If they want people to fight, they really should just make the rewards better. Like I said, I don't care as much about them, but it is pretty stupid that they are as bad as they are, and they definitely need to work on improving that. And I know I'm gonna nitpick a little bit, but rewards on Dark Seal were vastly better than this. Rewards on Island Raid vastly better than this. Rewards in Archipelago Raid just vastly better than this. And I was thinking about something. I was like, why are they not including? For example, they do this with every event, or at least with Island Raid, I know they have, is like, for example, if your group gets first place and you rank first among your actual alliance, you get better rewards. If your group ranks second place and you rank better among your alliance, you get better rewards as well. And I feel like this would have made a lot of sense to do this among, like, for example, how many rings you progress and how high you ranked within your alliance. Who did progress that many rings or something like that, right? And that would make sense because it's like you put in so much more effort as an alliance that made it to the last ring, generally, right, compared to an alliance that only made it to the third ring or something. And I just feel like this would have been a way to at least alleviate some of the rewards and make it make a little bit more sense. I don't know. It just didn't make sense how bad they were overall. I get like the returns and stuff, like the dead returns were better, but even then that's kind of expected given that you're fighting over, these bases amid like a science hub and stuff that's giving you 100% deads. So, you're generally going to be taking a lot more deads, compared to maybe just doing a lot of tower fights normally. So it did make sense to me they would increase the deads. So that couldn't really be used as a really valid excuse for why the rewards were as bad as they were. So point 3 for me will be matchmaking. I will say I actually defend the matchmaking quite a bit, and I still do defend it. I think if you're in Apex Warzone, I feel like there's a lot less room to wiggle around and try to call the matchmaking bad. I will say it is kind of the event's design fault, and there are a lot of faulty areas I feel like they went within the actual matching itself, because I think the matchmaking, or supposedly from how they've worded it, is the actual matchmaking itself are the alliances that are going into which war zone, right? And the only thing that really didn't make sense in this regard, for at least Apex for me, was that you had LAS in Warzone 2 and all the other strong groups in like Warzone 1, and then you had like 59E, which was a really strong group, NM49, which is a really strong group, all in Warzone 2, and it just doesn't make sense, and it feels like they're just trying to make both of these brackets somewhat strong, so they're both kind of exciting or something, but you should really be just trying to make one bracket, I would say, like, as a minimum requirement, if you're within the top 5 or the top 10 alliances, you should be placed within, Warzone 1 or something. Like, it just makes a lot more sense to me, and it doesn't make a lot of sense why they would throw these guys in Warzone 2 and take away a lot of the potentially like extremely interesting and whalish fights. Like LAS literally had no opponent there. And I don't know, man. It just didn't make a lot of sense to me. Like, that's kind of my personal take there. I will also say with like Fearless and stuff, although and actually, let me harp on Apex real quick. I know a lot of groups were complaining about being paired against ROK or something, and I will ask you guys this. Realistically, I don't know how the game could be at fault for, for example, let's say 7 billion or 10 billion or 12 billion alliance pairing against a 34 billion alliance, because realistically, how many alliances are on a similar playing scale? And that being said as well, how the event's format is, you're really likely to be bumping into them if you're progressing throughout these rings with them. Like, it's just how it is. Like, even if they actually do matchmaking within the rings, you're gonna end up bumping into them either way. Like, I just don't see the complaint like super valid there when you're in Apex, especially being the fact that you're in Apex and how the event's designed is, if you're in Apex, you're gonna potentially bump into these alliances. It is just how it is. If you want to avoid that, I feel like the only thing you can do is really split. I will say when it comes to Fearless, they really messed up because it didn't make a lot of sense to me. I was looking at a lot of these brackets, and you had like at least one alliance in each bracket that was borderline an Apex alliance, right? Which were like, 4.4 billion. You had so many of these groups that were obviously smurfed out, in these smaller brackets and stuff. And, this is going to be expected, but I feel like they could have done way better at kind of making the brackets better. And I will say, given the fact that there are 2,000 alliances and there's 128 alliances in each bracket, It is going to be hard to actually make really good balancing, and I think that's kind of the only issue with an event structure like this is that it's going to be really hard making 128 alliances in each actual bracket itself super even or super balanced. So either they lower the alliance pool, which I think would make sense, and that would kind of be like the most realistic thing they could do. I will say in itself, I actually think this matchmaking design is probably the best you could probably get. People are going to complain a lot, but as long as you're not getting carried up, your chances of getting a pretty good matchup from losing multiple times, for example, and going into losers queue, like imagine that you're a 2 billion alliance. Yeah, you're going to have really bad matchmaking for maybe 60 or 80% of the actual matchups, but at least you're going to get one potentially really good matchup if, let's say, you lose 4 in a row and then you get that last matchup in the loser bracket after losing said 4 in a row. Then that means your matchmaking is pretty likely to be relatively decent or relatively better. Whereas, for example, I think compared to Island Raid or Archipelago Raid, it's really cross your fingers. If you get a bad matchup, you're like, all right, I'm going to wait for the next one. That's all you can really do. Whereas with this one, at least you have the potential to sit some out and choose which fights you want to take. And I think that's kind of the point with this event. I don't think the whole point is exactly winning, since there's very few alliances that could win. Like in the case that we fought, it was like 16 war zones. So you're only going to have 2 alliances from each war zone actually winning. 128 alliances in a war zone. Just your chances of winning in general are extremely low, especially without having maybe a really good whale on your side. And that is just realistically how things are. I think it's really hard to make matchmaking ever perfect. And like I said, I do think that their matchmaking itself was actually pretty garbage. I think that they're putting alliances in certain war zones did not make sense. But in general, I find matchmaking to be one of those kind of topics that are very touchy, and it's never something that you're ever going to be able to like satisfy everybody with, because I feel like matchmaking is just impossible to generally perfect. And also, with my last point here, I'm really just going to be kind of petty here. I won't say if it's like actually true or false, but I think that seeding in here is actually very possible. I just think that is kind of suspicious. The fact that LAS managed to drop into Warzone 2 off of matchmaking. Maybe their matchmaking is supposed to make it to where, there's big alliances in each bracket, but it just doesn't make sense to arrange it like this in this type of event, or this type of how this one's designed. It doesn't make sense to spread them into 2 separate brackets. Like if you're gonna do 2 apex like zones or whatever, have some of the somewhat or semi stronger alliances within the next war zone and have all the top dogs within the first war zone. It just makes a lot more sense having all the top of the tops clash. Like why do we have two why do we have 2 groups coming in mid, right? In the last zone to fight it out for a win? It doesn't make sense. Like, isn't it supposed to be the best of one? Like, why do you have 2 alliances able to win in the actual war zone? Like, how does that make any sense? It just doesn't make sense to me. And this point might be a little bit petty. I do actually like them to an extent, but I'm also kind of just picky about these things. One thing that I have problems with are like super weapons. It's kind of similar to chainsaw zombies for me, whereas I think, it's kind of one of those features that just makes strong players stronger. And to be fair, I do think that this adds a really interesting aspect. I think I like the actual general thing of being able to burn people in territory and stuff, and being, there being a lot more risk involved and you having to play a lot smarter. But I don't like the fact that, for example, this is really just a whale's weapon, or, the strong of the brackets weapon. If I get something that's going to give me a competitive edge, I don't know. I mean, I guess it's fair, but it's also just kind of unfair, because imagine you're just already beating these guys like dogs and you just get a super weapon and you're like, all right, let me beat them even harder, And that's kind of how chainsaw zombies always felt to me. It's like, the strong get even better buffs to beat the people that they're already beating their heads into the wall, and there's only some, I feel like it's generally more situational, to where teams are kind of closer to these like don't matter as much, and it's a lot closer, whatever the case. You guys get my point with that. I just don't like it that much. I will say I like the fact that you do compete for like an objective of sorts, and like I said, I think it just adds kind of a variety to the overall game play and game style. I will say I also don't get why we're getting another event next week, right? And when I say next week, it's kind of coming up already. But we're getting another one of these, and hopefully this one's going to be kind of fixed up a bit. But it doesn't seem realistic since it came back around so quick. It just doesn't feel like they had enough time to kind of take in our feedback. Although the event is shorter and it's shortened to 3 days, which I feel like this might be done because there's Archipelago Raid around the corner, which makes this even more insane, the fact that we're going to be fighting this out. And the only case that this would make sense to me is if they're bringing back Kill Event. And if they bring back Kill Event, I will personally let this one slide, okay? I will personally let it slide, and I will just not care. I will say I do like, the death ratio, the fact that it's 80 to 85%, if you actually have the subscription, which is really nice, so I can give that a thumbs up. Although, given the fact that there's so much, like, there's so little fighting up middle, and, there's just not a lot of places, like, you just don't have enough time to have an insane amount of troops die. I mean, like I said, these structures up mid obviously do give 100% of deads, so it does make a lot more sense. But even then, there's just so little fighting compared to like Archipelago Raid or Island Raid, that it just doesn't feel like you're able to even like take advantage of these like 85% returns to the full extent, which I do not like. I will say, like I said earlier, I like the daily matchups. I think it gives you more control over your fights, over your actual matchups. And yeah, it won't always be perfect, but it does make it easier to make matchmaking bow down to you. It gives you, the player, the actual control over making, matchmaking kind of good. As long as, I think like the biggest issue would be if you're like a smaller player or smaller group, and you're kind of getting carried through brackets. And at that point, if matchmaking does you dirty, I think that you kind of ask for that one, okay? And I will say, finally, I actually like that the event's generally more casual as a whole. Like I mentioned, the shielding towers thing, it gives good downtime, which I think is actually really nice. It doesn't make me feel like I have to be chronically online, but there's not much incentive to fight, right? There's not much incentive to be online, do any objectives, and it feels like it's more so boring than it should be, especially given that at the end of the day, this is a PvP event and we come in really excited to have some fights, just to be sitting there snoring. And I think it's made even worse, the lack of fights, because like I said earlier, the rewards are so bad that there's no incentive for a lot of players to kind of get on the field or fight it out, because they're like, well, I'll just play an Archipelago Raid, my resources are better used there, why should I care about this event? One thing I will say, I also like the daily heals, the fact that you're getting a daily percentage of your actual troops healed, which is really nice, and it does incentivize me to maybe fill up my hospital every single day, because it's gonna clear out some of my hospital, and I might as well maximize on my wounded units. That being said, I'm gonna end off the video there. I think that kind of explained all my criticisms, my issues with this event, and yeah, I do appreciate you guys as always for watching. I hope you guys did have a good one. Okay, you have a good day or night, and I will see you guys in the next video, and that is about it. Peace out.